Richard Petty did not mince a single word. The 7-time NASCAR Cup Series champion, the king of the sport himself, was sitting on his podcast, The Petty Race Recap, on Monday, the day after the Cookout 400 at Martinsville Speedway. His co-host Dale Inman tried to be diplomatic about what had happened the day before, describing the incident between Bubba Wallace and Carson Hocevar as Wallace kind of getting into the number 77. Petty shut that down immediately. Kinda got into him, he just drove on in there and knocked the door out of him. That is the king. No softening, no hedging, no diplomatic cushion, just the bluntest possible verdict from the most decorated driver in NASCAR history. A man who had been physically present at Martinsville and watched the whole thing unfold with his own eyes. And when Richard Petty calls you out by name like that, the entire sport stops and listens. So what exactly happened on lap 324 of the Cookout 400? And why does it matter far beyond just one bad Sunday? Sunday, March 29th, 2026, Martinsville Speedway. Going into this race, Bubba Wallace was sitting third in the NASCAR Cup Series championship standings. Through the first 5 races of the 2026 season, he had posted 4 finishes of 11th or better. He had even sat second in the standings at one point. His 23 X1E racing team had genuine momentum, and for the first time in a long while, Wallace looked like a legitimate title contender. But there was a shadow hanging over that momentum, and its name was Tyler Reddick. Reddick, Wallace's own teammate at 23 X1 Racing, had been doing something nobody in NASCAR history had ever done before. Reddick became the first driver ever to win the first 3 Cup Series races of a season. By the time Martinsville arrived, he had won 4 of the first 6 races. That kind of dominance from the guy sharing your garage, your resources, and your manufacturer does not just show up in the standings, it builds pressure. It gets inside your head, and on lap 324 at Martinsville, that pressure had somewhere to go. It started 1 lap before the big wreck on a restart. Carson Hocevar, driving the number 77 Chevrolet for Spire Motorsports, made an aggressive move. He went 3 wide underneath Wallace heading into turn 1. There was contact. Hocevar got through and came out ahead of Wallace exiting turn 2. That is short track racing. Hard, physical, and completely within the boundaries of the sport. Wallace, however, did not see it that way. As they headed into turn 3 on the very next lap, Wallace closed up right behind Hocevar and shoved him. Then he did it again. He kept pushing into the back of Hocevar's car through turns 3 and 4. It was not a single tap. It was not a moment of accidental contact. It was repeated, sustained pressure into the rear of Hocevar's car across multiple corners. On the exit of turn 4, Hocevar's car finally spun around on the front stretch and the chain reaction began. 12 cars were collected in that single moment. Daniel Suarez, Chris Buescher, Zane Smith, Connor Zilish, Austin Hill, John Hunter Nemechek, Eric Jones, Michael McDowell, and even Riley Herbst, Wallace's own 23 X1 racing teammate, were all swept into the wreck. It was one of the ugliest incidents of the 2026 season, triggered in a matter of seconds. Hocevar's team worked through the damage and kept him on the lead lap. He fought back through the field and finished 17th. Matching his best ever result at Martinsville Speedway. For a driver whose car had just been spun into oncoming traffic, that was a remarkable recovery. Wallace had no such recovery available. His day was done. He finished 36th, his first DNF of the season, and made a trip to the infield care center before facing the media. Right there on pit road, Wallace spoke to Jamie Little from Fox Sports and did not attempt to dodge responsibility. He said, "I misjudged. I didn't appreciate the 3 wide into 1. Fine, but I misjudged the center of the corner and didn't mean to turn him." Wallace was claiming frustration triggered the move, but insisting the wreck itself was unintentional. The paddock, however, was watching the same replay everybody else was. One contact is a misjudgment. Multiple contacts across multiple corners is a different conversation entirely, and a lot of people were not accepting the explanation at face value. Back to Richard Petty. He was at Martinsville that Sunday in person. He did not watch this on television. He saw it happen. And on the Petty Race Recap, when Dale Inman offered the gentlest possible version of events, Petty's response was immediate and unambiguous. Kind of got into him. He just drove on in there and knocked the door out of him. That carries enormous weight in this sport. Richard Petty has seen more NASCAR racing than almost any living human being. When he delivers a verdict that direct, it is not an opinion. It is a judgment from the highest possible authority in the room. Kevin Harvick was calling the race live on Fox and flagged it the moment it happened on television. He said Wallace drove straight through the number 77 and suggested something emotionally was off with Wallace well before the contact even occurred. Harvick pointed to the fact that Wallace had already been struggling through a difficult race day before the restart sequence even began. Kyle Petty, Richard's son and a longtime NASCAR analyst, went the furthest in breaking down the reasons behind the incident on the Inside the Race podcast. He spoke from experience, acknowledging both sides of frustration-driven contact. "Listen, I've been wrecked and I've wrecked," he said, "and it is frustration." But then Kyle introduced the concept nobody else was fully articulating: double frustration. The first layer was straightforward. Wallace was having a bad race day. The second layer ran much deeper. Because you're getting beat and banged on, you're not having the day you want to have. And the whole time we've talked about this year, we've talked about 23XY and Tyler Reddick. Watching your own teammate rewrite the history books while your own results stall, that is a specific kind of pressure that does not leave you when the green flag drops. Kyle Petty framed it clearly. You race your teammates. I don't give a rat's rear end what anybody says. You race your teammates. You want to be top of the heap, king of the hill in your own team. And I think there's some frustration and some pent-up anger in that when you get into it. Kyle also made a deliberate point of defending Hocevar. The number 77 driver has a well-earned reputation for aggressive racing. Hurricane Hocevar is not a nickname given lightly, and Kyle acknowledged that people instinctively default to blaming him when contact happens, but he was firm. Taking you 3 wide at Martinsville is not cause for what we're seeing right here on the screen. The 3 wide move was hard racing. What followed was not a proportionate response. Steve Latarta offered a more measured interpretation. He believed Wallace intended to make contact, a bump to move Hocevar for position, but badly miscalculated the throttle. Bump and run is a legitimate short track tactic at Martinsville. The difference between moving someone and destroying their race comes down to execution, and Wallace pushed it far beyond the line. The most painful reaction came from inside Wallace's own operation. Freddie Kraft, Wallace's spotter, the man in the tower feeding him real-time information throughout every race, went on the Door Bumper Clear podcast and was completely unsparing. "There's not really any sugarcoating about it. I got to take Bubba for his word," Kraft said, before adding that if he misjudged, it was a really bad misjudgment and it hurts. Then Kraft put the points damage into plain language. "We went from 3rd in points to now we're tied for 8th with 5 other guys." Effectively, Wallace dropped to 11th in the championship. He had arrived at Martinsville with a real shot at a title. 4 strong finishes and 5 races, sitting 3rd in the standings, genuine playoff positioning on the horizon. After back-to-back DNFs at Darlington and now Martinsville, all of that early season work had been erased. Kraft did not stop there. You can't have those moments. And if you want to be a contender for the championship, or a contender to be top 5, top 7, 8th in points, whatever it is, that chase can't happen. Then came the word that stings more than any other. Kraft called it self-inflicted, not a mechanical failure, not bad luck, not another driver taking Wallace out. Wallace did this to his own season. That one word, self-inflicted, is the entire story of what happened at Martinsville in a single term. Meanwhile, Hocevar had his own response to the chaos. Over the team radio immediately after the wreck, he called it Bubba Shake and Bake, a direct reference to the movie Talladega Nights, delivered in real time while his car was still spinning. That is Hurricane Hocevar in one moment. Under NASCAR's new chase points format, the math is even more brutal than it used to be. Fox Sports insider Bob Pockras noted that the new system punishes emotional decisions far harder than the old win-and-in playoff structure. There is no automatic berth waiting as a safety net. Every single position in the regular season standings carries direct consequences for playoff seeding and championship viability. A difference of 19 points, the gap between what Wallace scored and what a clean race might have delivered, was the difference between sitting tied for 8th and sitting 6th. These margins now define careers. Wallace's own words after the race pointed toward what comes next. "We can win Saturday in practice, just don't show up on Sunday. I hate it for our team, just frustration. Take a week off and reset and go on to Bristol." The NASCAR Cup Series has one weekend off before the Food City 500 at Bristol Motor Speedway on April 12th. Wallace will need every one of those days. Richard Petty watched the whole thing at Martinsville in person and delivered his verdict without hesitation. Freddie Kraft called it self-inflicted without flinching. Kyle Petty traced it back to the weight of watching Tyler Reddick dominate from the same garage, and Bubba Wallace himself called it a misjudgment. What is not in dispute is the result. 12 cars wrecked, a championship campaign set back, and one moment at a short track that the number 23 team will spend the rest of the 2026 season trying to recover from.